the reason why people remained home was really an employee-based decision. This was not a decision made by organizations. What was happening was employees were putting their foot down and saying, not coming back. And a lot of organizations relented because the last thing they wanted to do was lose their employee base. Now, we saw culture starting to slump.
If you're ready to unlock momentum, you're in the right place. I'm Aaron Kopel, the Momentum Locksmith, and this is where CIOs come to grow. Hi, everyone. Aaron Kopel here with the Unlocking Momentum podcast. I'm very excited today to have Warren Lenard with us. Warren's a great guy that I've known for many years, and we're here to talk today about unlocking momentum, some of Warren's experiences there in helping organizations really get going from an IT and technical perspective and leadership perspective. And then also getting into some things, as the world changes faster and faster, some examples that Warren has about personal change or things that we need to unlearn to go faster in the future, as well as a hot take on something, really interesting or controversial, and then getting into a future trend or challenge. So Warren, welcome.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm happy to be here, honored to be here, and thank you for having me on your show.
First one I usually dump into is the name of the podcast, Unlocking Momentum. So, really thinking about a time when you or your team, your organization, might have been stuck and just trying to, break through to that next level. Kind of curious, what comes to mind when you think about that, just trying to, break through and unlock momentum?
There could be a number of things that I cite as far as, we all go through our challenges. We all have periods where we are stuck. And, when I reflect back on my days in New York and the various different companies that I worked for, you have your challenges that are, not unlike anybody else's challenges and you fight through. But when I really think about the course of time and completely over my career, I can't really, and I know it's somewhat old news at this point, but I can't think of a time that was more challenging than COVID for so many reasons. And I know that there were many, many organizations that were affected by this. In fact, I did a talk at the Indiana IT Symposium back in 2023, I think it was at this point, where I talked about, some of the impacts of this. And the challenges were varied depending upon the industry and vertical that you were in. At the time when COVID hit, I was CIO at Byrider. Byrider was really significantly hit by COVID and really never regained itself. It's an organization now that is trying to thrive and move forward, but looks considerably different today as a much, much smaller, just franchisor only business. And so when COVID hit us, it hit us for so many different reasons. And it really had to do with the major impacts that happened to supply chain. Chip production was down and, supply chain, therefore, and inventory across a number of different products. And cars were clearly majorly impacted. If anybody went to a dealership at that time, they knew there were no cars on the lot. And if you wanted a car, especially in this environment in Indy, most of the dealerships were focusing on SUVs because that is a big purchase item here in the Midwest. But if you wanted a sedan, you had to order it, and it could take months to get the sedan. And so new car dealerships were struggling. These are dealerships that roll cars out the door on a monthly basis at astronomical levels. And their sales were now completely crippled because of the supply chain issues. So what did the new car dealerships have to do? They had to resort to used car sales. And when those new car dealerships started to do that top feeding in the used car market, that had an impact on us, because now the traditional used car dealerships were having their lunch eaten by the new car dealerships. And so they had to do some top feeding as well. And at the end of the day, when you get down to Byrider, where we're buying cars for the subprime market, and we were always, kind of a third tier, if you will, in the used car market, we're now forced to be buying cars that had increased miles, that were older, that we had to charge more for. Not a recipe for success. And so sales, just from that alone, began to slump. Not to mention, on the worker side, or the customer side, the majority of our customers being subprime worked in hospitality. And hospitality was one of the most impacted industries of COVID. Restaurants, hotel, name it, whatever And anything where you had to deal with people that was severely impacted. There's a lot of folks, our customers were now out of work. And so it was a double whammy for Byrider. Not only we were not selling cars, but people who had the cars, the collections started to become a struggle as well. And so that's why I'm saying when it came to, COVID, it really hit Byrider extra hard on both ends. And not to mention then as an organization, we were faced with the same challenges everybody were. We had to retreat our workforce home and do it fairly quickly. And a big part of that organization was the collections team, which was sizable. At the time, like I mentioned, Byrider really was two sides of the house. We were a franchisor where had franchisees that we worked with and supported. And then we were actually kind of a franchisee ourselves because we owned our own stores as well. And the majority of the Byrider organization at the headquarters was really focused on supporting those 30 some odd stores that we had. And so it was really two halves of the organization, and the collections team was pretty sizable. This was a team that was traditionally, used to be back in the day, they were actually at the store. And at one point prior to me getting there, it was centralized to be brought in to the actual headquarters. And it was a large team in the office. And now all of a sudden, this team had to be retreated home. And then how do you go about managing this workforce now that was largely managed in person? Now you have to manage this remotely. And so I'm not saying that wasn't also challenging just managing the rest of the organization remotely, because as a leader, you're so used to just leading in person and dealing with people in person, because I truly believe things like leadership are observed, not learned per se. And doing it over the screen was a significant challenge. I remember having I would have quarterly all hands meetings with my entire IT organization. And that first one that we had during COVID, we had to have it over remote. And it wasn't my favorite experience in presenting and talking. And at times you're sitting there, and I would typically have a slide deck for these meetings, and you're presenting it. And I'm actually wondering if anybody's still the other end of the call. We check in with everybody every once in a while. But the challenge of managing the remote collections team was an extra challenge for that organization, for the operations part of the team. Now, thankfully, there had been a migration to a platform that we use for communication and collections that the team, and also a new phone system, which helped a lot. So we had the metrics and the KPIs that were built in that helped us manage it and help that operations team manage the remote collections team, effectively. But it was definitely a challenge, definitely difficult. To me, this was one of the most challenging that I've ever had in my career.
Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like, the technology part of that, it happened suddenly for a lot of companies, but, that was maybe the easier part than trying to figure out how do you start managing and leading completely differently than you did yesterday, right? Especially with those like frontline employees. And it's just a shift for those frontline managers on how to actually manage it and, not feel like people are being, overburdened or micromanaged at the same time. They got to be effective and be able to do their job and, coach them and things like that. And so that's a pretty big shift. That's tough.
Yeah. And, from a technical aspect, the team did a great job of actually getting that done. And we got everybody home in literally over just a couple of weeks' time. It then became the leadership challenge and the resulting impact over time to company culture. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a big fan of being in person. I'm not saying that the technology does not support us to be able to be remote at times, because it does. But as a mainstay, as 100%, I don't think it works as well. And I think there's so much value of being in front of a person and speaking face to face, even in this world of AI and everything else, and the capabilities that we have for remote work. I still think there's tremendous value in being in person. A little background on me. I've had a very long career within IT. Went to actual school for computer science. My career has spanned, very many verticals. I've spent the majority of my career in the private sector, retail. My last job within retail, working for a company called The Children's Place, was actually in New Jersey. And when I landed in transition after that, I decided to cast kind of a wider net. At the time, recruiters were contacting me, would I be willing to cast a wider net and consider relocation? It brought us here to Indianapolis, where I started working for Finish Line. And then from there, I moved over to a company called Byrider, headquartered in Carmel, in the auto sales and financing market for the subprime market. Spent 6 years there as CIO. And then after found myself in transition at the end of 2024, considered a number of different roles, including launching my own LLC, the Lenard Group, and were contemplating different paths to take at that time. The one that I didn't expect, because I didn't pursue it, was the state government pursuing me for the lead of the Indiana Office of Technology. I had never been in public sector before, had no experience. I decided to have the interview and had a wonderful conversation with who is my boss today, Secretary Hirschman, who reports into Governor Braun, and wanted me to come aboard. She was specifically looking for somebody in the private sector who was going to bring kind of a fresh perspective to the role. After a conversation with her, a subsequent interview with some of the other commissioners in the OMB vertical, I decided to take the role. Over 6 months later, here I am in the public sector, which is crazy because I'm in probably the most challenging and largest role I've ever been in my career. And yet I have completely now raised the bar, and I'm okay with that. So I do wear a number of different other hats. As you know, I'm president of the Indianapolis chapter of SIM, the Society for Information Management. It is the largest senior IT leadership organization in the country. We actually give back to the community in the way of volunteer programs, STEM programs, scholarships, you name it. It's a rewarding organization to be a part of, and certainly even more so leading an organization like SIM.
Yeah, that's great. I've been a member for probably nearly 10 years now as well. And so it's just been a great experience. The biggest differentiator with that group versus other technology or peer groups is a lot of that giving back to the community, which is great.
Truly, that is the SIM differentiator. As far as the government goes, I'm the co-chair of the Indiana Executive Council on Cybersecurity, as well as the chair for the state and local cybersecurity grant program. So you wear a lot of hats here at the government as well. When I first got into it, it was interesting for me to kind of, understand, this is really about, the Hoosiers and citizens. You think about how you can impact people's lives, and people talked about it when I came in, and I was listening to them, but I wasn't feeling it. And now 6 months in, I'm totally feeling that.
Yeah. Well, that's a super interesting background, and thanks for sharing that. I mean, it seems like every industry and every aspect, and now the public sector, like I said, is a new and different, interesting challenge we'll dive into. I know we've talked in the past about this, but you want to share a little bit about, from a leadership team standpoint, from the C-level, like what did that look like as you went through that kind of change, and how did they adapt?
So, we really had to kind of change our methodology. You couldn't allow yourself to say, well, we'll just do things the way we always did it. As a leadership team, you'll have meetings at some cadence, maybe weekly meetings. And as an executive team, we had weekly executive meetings every Monday. And the fact was that, especially in the early days of COVID, and for some time, we couldn't act like that anymore. We needed to be able to react to things a lot quicker. It couldn't be, well, we'll get to it next week when we have another meeting. So the whole concept across the board around daily stand-ups was very, very important. Being able to come together every morning and say, okay, what's today's challenge? Not what's this week's challenge. What is today's challenge? And what do we need to get through? Just to make sure that we were not only there for each other, but we were there for our teams as well.
Yeah, that's really important. And it takes those kind of major events sometimes to really, bring the team together to be able to do that kind of stuff of really, forming those communication channels and having a daily huddle. And I imagine even after that, I mean, I'm sure sometimes during the day things would change. You need to regroup and deal with an issue or some kind of problem that came up. And then that starts to shift your culture then to have those communication lines more open and more readily available when things do come up, I imagine.
Yeah. And when you think about the business was heavily impacted and we had to react to that. So, we had to make some very difficult decisions along the way. And when the government stimulus kind of stepped in and the forgiveness programs, that seemed to alleviate some things and we started tracking better, but we probably weren't as smart as we should have been because what it did for our customers was artificially inflate some of the credit scores because there was this forgiveness and there was this stimulus. And it's an algorithm, let's face it. It's an algorithm that compiles the different components and different numbers and puts them together and say, here's your score. And you had people who were qualifying for vehicles and loans that probably shouldn't have. And in the beginning, that looks great. And in the end, it doesn't look so great when all of that dries up and people can't make those payments. So what happened with us was there was an initial, challenge that we seemingly not only got through technically, but started to adapt and adopt new methods around our leadership styles to get to a point where we felt like, oh, we could be coming out of this, only to realize later, no, we're not. And we now have another challenge. And that came back to us full circle of having to make some difficult decisions about the organization and ultimately doing more with less. That wasn't a particularly good thing for anyone to have to deal with. And it also wasn't easy to then manage the culture from there, because now you're starting to impact the culture even further. People are now fearful. What if there is more bad news down the road? Is my job at stake? Things like that. So you're working remotely, you're challenged with leadership, and now you have people kind of living in fear. And so it really was coming at us from all angles and very difficult to manage. And ultimately, it kind of led to where Byrider is today, to make those decisions of what do we need to do as an organization to survive. Byrider at the time was private equity held, and our private equity firm, where we had been on a tremendous trajectory from a profitability standpoint. And all of a sudden that just took a dip down, where we were probably their number one producer in their portfolio and quickly became maybe their number one challenge. And so things changed. The company eventually split into two halves. The stores were downsized. Byrider is a much smaller organization, just a franchisor. All the stores are franchisee based. There are no company owned stores. Headquarters and the employees there are completely downsized and very small, and they're just looking to grow the franchise business, and I wish them well.
Yeah, and sure, lots of lessons in leadership from all sides, right? Working through some of those challenges is tough, but it builds that capability and credibility for the future as well. So that's maybe as we transition to the next topic, thinking about that, like leadership and sort of personal change and, things that you've gone through, again, a lot of different industries. Is great to dive into that example with Byrider, but kind of thinking about that and taking that forward, some of those lessons learned, and what did you take away from that, and how's that impacted your leadership today?
When I started and I graduated with my computer science degree, my very first job was actually working not for what was called back then, going to date myself, MIS, Management Information Systems. And I worked for a company called Associated Dry Goods, which were the owners of stores like Lord & Taylor, J.W. Robinson, LS Ayres, which I believe was actually here. And so I worked for that organization and actually came in, did not work for the MIS department. I went to work for the International Operations Department, and I wound up working for the International Operations, Senior Vice President directly. I was leading teams within the International Operations Department, some data entry clerks, things like that. And so my leadership career started in that first job. It wasn't like, years of being an engineer or what have you, and then eventually getting to management and whatnot. I started leading right away. And so I recognized over time that leadership was really a strength of mine. I should leverage it. And I need to hone that skill because I saw the value in good leadership. And so for me, a lot of what got me here was really about honing my skills as a leader, trying to be the best leader possible, which part of that is around coaching and mentoring others and making them good leaders, enabling them to be good leaders. And so what I have found that over time as my career moved forward and I went from organization to organization, I found myself doing more and more of the coaching and the mentoring and the enabling. And it was really a slow journey of less about me and more about them. And for a number of reasons, and then even coming here to the public sector and managing the largest team that I've personally ever managed of 450 people. You can't not do that and be effective as a leader. It is about enabling those folks because you can't be in the minutia of everything in the organization. Otherwise you'll drown. And so by being more of a leader who's enabling others and getting them to be the visible ones, getting them to take the ownership of certain things versus me just keeping it to myself. No, I have that. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be stepping in and taking things and away from folks. What you want to be doing is enabling them and showing them the way of how they can be more of an effective leader. And so to me, that's been the concentration for me now, and making sure that I'm doing that as a leader and making sure that they become the best leaders that they can be. And sometimes those are hard conversations because you've got to be at times critical, but it's all about trying to spin that in a positive way and how people could be better.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And that's something we talk about a lot in our leadership classes as well, is that rebalancing of your, where your focus area is, like you said, going from maybe more tactical and even doing the job sometimes or directly managing people doing the job to then maybe, goal setting and trying to set them up for success to really then that last step we usually call catalyst leadership, where you're trying to create the environment for them to be successful and operating more like a coach and really setting them up for success. And so, it's not completely taking your hands off the wheel, but it's really being more of a catalyst and instigator for them to be as effective as they can be. That sounds like, rebalancing that towards that direction of coaching is where you're going.
And really trying to, because look at, in going from organization to organization, I would typically see the same types of things from organization to organization, right?
Yeah, patterns across organizations pretty similar, right?
Yeah. Especially, and not to stereotype IT people at all, but there were certain things you would see very often that you say, well, I saw this last time as well. And the usual suspects, the things that are going to probably be your challenges. You may not have technical capability challenges, but you have communication challenges, right? And so I would see that from time and time again. So a lot of my efforts in making people or enabling people to be better leaders was really about making them better communicators. And it was something that people had a hard time even understanding when I go after things like, you probably could have said that better, or you could have written that better. Because to tell you the truth, a lot of times what's more important is how you say something than actually what you're saying. Because that's what's going to actually get with your audience. And, getting people to understand that a lot of times IT folks, we can make people feel stupid because we are communicating in acronyms and technical terms, and there's nothing worse than doing that because now your audience is on their heels, right? Because they're kind of feeling like not the smartest person in the room. And that's not what you want to accomplish. What you want to accomplish is you want to partner with people and bring things to their level. And it's not that they're not intelligent people. They just are really good at other things, from a supply chain or for marketing or finance or whatever is their, piece of expertise in the organization. It's not IT because that's our job. But when we're communicating, we have to be able to go in and speak that language and explain to people what the issue is and how we're resolving it or what the challenge is and speak at their terms. And so I've found that over the years, making people better leaders was really about making them better communicators.
Yeah, it's a good point. And that's one of the challenges we often, will encounter is trying to help the IT side of the equation speak more of what the business will understand so that we're on the same page. And if we're talking the language of the customer, that's usually very helpful. So yeah, it's a really good observation. So getting into some interesting and maybe controversial areas, kind of curious, if your hot take. So Warren, what's your hot take, that controversial thing we want to bring up and dig into a little bit?
To me, it's really return to office. Because as we talked about the COVID thing, we talked about all those challenges, right? One of the things was that at various stages, organizations started to realize where they misstepped. And this was part of the talk that I gave at that Indiana IT Symposium, where I talked about the fact that the decision to stay remote, the reason why people remained home was really an employee-based decision. This was not a decision made by organizations. Organizations were dealing with all sorts of challenges in getting their business to survive. They had a remote workforce that was basically pretty happy about being home. People made decisions they were actually told not to make. I had employees give up second cars. basically give up childcare services. Employees immediately looked at this as an opportunity. I had an employee come up to me when I first had my next in-person meeting, when we finally got through those first couple of months. I had an employee come up to me and basically say to me, "Wow, it was really difficult for me to get here today." And I was like, "Why is that?" And it's because I had given my car to my daughter. I was like, "Well, why'd you do that?" Like, because, no one said this was going to be permanent. What was happening was employees were putting their foot down and saying, "Not coming back." And a lot of organizations were elected because the last thing they wanted to do was lose their employee base now, on top of the challenges they were already going through. And I think that gets back to the earlier point we made, that we saw culture starting to slump. The initial retreat to home culturally was fairly easy because many of us had already worked together in person for many years. So we knew each other. So to retreat home, the relationships were built. The culture was there. And so you're not going to undo that just by being remote for a period of time. But over time, as an organization transitions and people move on and new people join, those new people now have never been in person and they have joined the company remotely. And I will tell you that you can't build the same type of relationship with somebody remotely that you can in person. It's a different experience. And I can tell you wholeheartedly, when Byrider first went through it, we were in the process of hiring a new chief marketing officer. And great guy, I'm still very friendly with him today. And he was out of North Carolina. When we were hiring him, he was going to eventually relocate to Indy because we were an organization of, you work here, you live here. For the first couple of months, because of COVID, everybody just kind of stood still. So he stayed in North Carolina, and our meetings were all over video. Not only our executive leadership meetings, but also my one-on-ones with him. And then finally, a couple of months into it, he made his way here for his first in-person visit. And we had a dinner one night, and then afterwards, he and I got together for a cocktail. And what I will tell you is that our relationship in those 2 hours that we spent together just talking went from here to here in an instant. You can't dismiss the human experience and what it can do for people. And so I think what happened was, over time, as organizations were really replacing and new people were joining and they just didn't have the same level of relationships, they saw culture going down. And it's why you see so many organizations today have basically said, nope, back to the office. Many technology companies have done it. Every industry has done it. And on July 1, the state government did it. And it wasn't, hybrid. It was, we're back in the office 5 days a week, full time. And, listen, we're human beings. I'm a human being. I understand the way I run my agency. I get it. If you have things that you've got to do, there's complete flexibility to get them done. You need to work home one day because you have a contractor coming to the house or whatever it might be. Go do it. You have a sick kid, you need to be home, do it. There's nothing wrong with that because you can effectively do that on a one-off basis. Walk over to someone's office or walk over to their desk and say hello and talk about a topic. There's no replacement for that because I'm going to find out things that I wouldn't normally find out anyway else. It gives another dimension to our relationship.
Yeah, that adds a flavor to that human connection and relationship, like you said. And, a lot of that, effective communication is, building awareness, empathy, trust, those kind of things. And it's much easier to do when you're in person, bumping into each other and just having those hallway conversations, right?
Right. And so I bring it up because there are still folks that are just not happy with that situation and believe, wholeheartedly that they were better off at home. And I hear the word that is thrown out there about productivity, and that is used a lot from folks that believe that they could work just effectively at home than they will in the office. And I'm a firm believer, let's say, listen, if I'm bringing you into the office and all you're doing is sitting on Teams meetings all day, that's not a good use of your time. I 100% understand. That's why I encouraged all of the leadership that when people do come back, spend more time in person in the conference rooms or at their desk or going to lunch or whatever it might be, and don't just force people to be on Teams meetings all day because you don't want to come away from your desk or your office. So we do a lot of that. And I just think that it is not just about productivity. Leadership is observed. And that's very important as you're standing in front of the room and you're talking. It's a lot of things. It's around body language. It's around facial expressions, around tone. It's how you're handling a situation, or how maybe I handle what might be an aggressive question from someone on my leadership team that asks me in the middle of a big leadership meeting. And how I handle that is going to be observed by everybody. And so that's an important aspect of it. So I get the fact that people could feel that they have more productivity because they're not now commuting to work and not coming home at the end of the day. So they regain that time. But I think there's
some benefit to that though too, like the decompression of that drive home for 10 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever your drive is, right? But there's some like mental preparation and separation from, hey, I'm at home and now I'm at work, and then I'm at work, now I go home, and I've got some time to sort of disconnect and switch gears, right?
So you brought up a very valid point. I spent a lot of time on that point in my talk that I gave, which was clearly about the transition time, transitioning of getting to work, transitioning of going home. And there are countless articles around this that talk about the effectiveness of that. And at times, it doesn't matter if it's a 10-minute commute or a 1-hour commute. It gives you the decompression time. It gives you the ramp up time to get prepared as you're pulling into the parking lot or wherever, and you get there. There's this whole kind of mental cadence you go through to get into that mode, which is not going to happen when you walk out of one room of your house to the other, or maybe you're just already in the room that you're going to eventually be in, because then everybody has a setup where they might have a separate office and whatnot. So yeah, 100% spot on.
Yeah. A lot of this goes back to culture and really trying to build that. And, one of the things we've seen with a lot of our clients is, to your point, as you bring new people in that have been in the workforce, they've been in other companies. So maybe they weren't part of this culture and had those specific relationships, but they've been in it before. A lot of our clients that are going back, and very few are staying completely remote. A lot of them are doing some kind of hybrid where it's, maybe 3-4 days in the office. But I think that, full-time back in, just, that feel of being together. And, a lot of what we promote, of course, is teamwork. And so to your point about the productivity thing, I see that a lot, but it's more about like individual productivity. I've got a task list I can work through it, just sort of put the blinders on and focus on getting my stuff done. But when it's not a my stuff situation, when it's our stuff, then it's better to be together and really collaborate. And, being in person can help a lot when you're really trying to be a true team and trying to really get some challenging problems, done with more brain power together. It just seems like a much better way to do it. So that's a lot of what we've seen.
Especially when you're trying to tear down silos, right? And we know silos exist. And I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni and the stuff that he's put out there, and the whole concept of first team mentality, understanding. And I'm sure you know all this, that the idea of first team is you ask most people who is their first team, and they will likely say the team they manage. When really your first team is the team of your peers. And when you make your peers your first team, and the people who you do manage see that, they see that you have, and in my case here, it would be me having the back of the other agency leads, that it's not all about IoT versus, another agency. It's no, they're my first team. I've got their back, they've got my back, and we're partnering together. That breaks down the silos across everybody. And there's no better way to do that than by doing it in person.
Well, that brings up a really good topic as well. And, I know you've seen this as the head of IT in multiple organizations, but, the job of the CIO, oftentimes people look at that as like, oh, you manage the IT department, you're the head of technology and you're the tech guy. But I think what we see a lot is that C-level role, to your point, really becomes more of that peer role with your other folks that are not in IT. And so in, private sector is going to be, head of marketing, finance, things like that for you, like I said, agency heads. Can you talk more about that and just what's that sort of transition been like as, bridging across that and trying to break down those silos?
I think a lot of us, many of us, all of us are going through the same things. You and I have had conversations about this as well, where it is about that partnership. It is about building those relationships, because there was a time back in the day where the CIO and the IT organization were the gatekeepers for technology. It was as simple as that. And some in some organization may have been referred to as the Department of No. And unfortunately, some had, gotten that reputation and worn that badge, but you really want to be the Department of Enablement. But for a time, if you wanted technology, you had to go through the technology organization itself. And that has changed dramatically. At the end of the day, when you think about it, everybody's the CIO because they're all wearing the technology hat. There is nothing that goes on in the business world, private sector, public sector, it doesn't really matter. There is nothing that goes on that has nothing to do with technology. Very often when I've been in meetings and I see, I don't know, there could be a topic being discussed around sloping sales or lead generation or whatever it might be. You're watching the conversation happening and it's ping-ponging around the room. And you realize that at some point, the ping pong ball is going to land right in front of you because it'll be a technology thing. We need a technology. And, that is another issue and challenge because technology is so widespread, cloud solutions and everything else. We're not the gatekeepers anymore. Many people are doing those end arounds because the vendors are now not marketing just to CIOs. They're marketing to all C-levels, to chief marketing officers, to chief revenue officers, to chief human resource officers. A company like a Workday or what have you might just go right to them because that's my customer, as opposed to going to the CIO to get there. That's not happening. And so we have to change how we go about this. If you're going to just plant your feet in the sand as a CIO and say, no, it needs to be the way it was, you're never going to get anywhere and you will not be successful. The world has changed. You've got to start to now deal with it on a different basis. And that has to do with partnering and being able to show people, your partners, those other folks that, yes, I know now that you are involved in the technology conversation and you have probably more technology knowledge than your predecessors from a decade ago. But we, as technology professionals for decades, have a tremendous amount of experience, and we can help you. So partnering together is going to be the way we generate a win-win for said organization or agency or the state. I've been an advocate of really trying to address problem statements before we get to solutions because that's a big part of this problem that I just mentioned. You have vendors selling solutions to other C-levels before we actually even know what the problem statement is. And so that makes it even further complicated. So you're dancing around that whole thing and trying to work with it. So building those relationships and establishing that partnership is tantamount to anybody's ongoing success.
That's a really good point, especially as you think about, vendors are selling a cool, sexy solution to these different business leaders across an organization, and they all could choose different ones, right? And so, help, as you said, trying to get in front of that and partner with those business folks to help them define the problem and maybe define it together so that we're getting a solution across everyone that'll work so we don't have, 15 things that solve the same problem from different directions. And I can imagine at the state, a huge organization, obviously, I imagine there's, different departments, different areas that might suffer from that same kind of thing at different levels. And the CIO ends up being in a very unique position to see a lot of that because you're seeing across the organization from that technology and problem solving perspective, which, like you said, be able to partner and really help them better define problems up front across that higher level, not just their individual department or business unit or agency, can be really, really powerful and impactful. So, the role of the CIO becomes, highlighted and just much more visible and important across that kind of situation when you get sort of out of just managing IT into that sort of peer conversation and role of being a partner.
All of us as CIOs have to wear that business hat.
Yeah, for sure. Great insights there. And a couple other things I want to get to in the show today. So next one is a future trend or challenge. So, something that maybe is on the horizon that's out there that we need to pay attention to. So kind of curious for your take on that, Warren.
I'll bring up the term that everybody brings up. So I'll flag the AI name again. One of the things you hear a lot, right, about AI and the fear that many people have is AI is going to take my job, right? That's clearly a controversial topic and a challenge. I think that is presented itself for many people that I think to a certain degree is unfounded, right? If anything, history has taught us, right, that we've seen this before, maybe not at this level because AI is got its tentacles out in many different places at this point. But we've seen it before, over time, the Industrial Revolution of what happened then, and how there were jobs that existed that were critical jobs that didn't exist anymore. I remember the day when there was word processing centers. And people just rows and rows and rows of people where there were just word processing centers is what they did. They created documents, right? You don't have that anymore. Assembly line workers. There were telephone operators back in the day. I mean, there's just so much that technology eventually steps on, and those jobs eventually go by the wayside, but it doesn't happen overnight. What happens is it happens more gracefully over time. And that part of the organization potentially might age out, if you will. So I don't believe at all that AI has come to take people's jobs, but somebody knows how to use AI might. That is a skill set we are all going to have to come to terms with, because the technology is creeping into everything. I'll be the first one to say that the problem statement needs to be addressed, always first. And you never adopt a technology just for the sake of adopting a technology. And we've all gone through it, right? A CEO pounding the fist, we need AI, but not really knowing what to do with it.
Yep.
They just want to know that we're doing something with AI. It's FOMO. And we're not immune to that here either, but people are going to have to come to grips with understanding and how to implement and use and leverage AI, because that's going to be directly related to your level of productivity. And it's happening fast. You won't be able to do things manually anymore at some point, because you just won't be keeping up with what's happening. So understanding how to do it, we're talking here about a literacy program around AI that we believe is very, very important, because that will give people the education and the skills to more effectively use AI than just getting a tool and saying, have at it.
Well, as we get to wrap it up, we talked a lot about, the work aspects and, career path and things like that today, but kind of curious, what's your biggest passion outside of work?
My entire life, I've been very much into fitness, nutrition, things like that. Really, health and fitness really became a mainstay for me, probably around the time that I turned 30, where it was more than just about, let's say, going to the gym and eating right. It was dipping into the science of it. And what is the data saying? And what is really the realities of it? And for many, many, many years now later, I've studied health and nutrition and exercise physiology, nutritional basics, supplementation, all of those things to a very great extent. I'd almost argue that I might know the space as good as I know the technology space, just because it is such a huge passion of mine, because I do believe that it's very important what you do outside of work and how you treat yourself is going to have everything to say about who you are when you show up to work.
Going back to the earlier point about the work from home and people getting comfortable at home, I imagine a lot of people just became very sedentary because they didn't have a reason to get up and get out of the house, right? So yeah, that's just like one very basic thing, but get off the couch, go for a walk kind of thing. And that's like just maybe the starting point for some people's fitness. So coffee chat. If you could have a coffee and a chat with anyone alive or dead, who would it be?
One of my other passions is music. I love music. It's a huge part of my life. I'm always listening to music. I'm a drummer as well, so I just, participate in that. And my son's a drummer. It's kind of fun. So there are probably several people, but I wouldn't mind sitting down, having coffee with either a Paul McCartney or a Jimmy Page.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. I think
sure
that'd be a lot of fun. Lots of good stories.
A pinnacle moment for me.
Yeah, that's great. That's cool. So if you were to give your younger self some advice, what would that advice be? If you went back to try to give your, maybe college self some advice, what would you say?
Don't sweat the small stuff, as well as in every aspect of your life. Less is more. And if you apply that, no matter what it is, I think you'll set yourself up for greater success, whether it's in business or personal. It's a great attitude to have. It's one I'm trying to instill in my kids.
All right. Well, last one of these questions. What would you like to be remembered for?
That I was able to make a difference in people's lives. Simple as that. I'm passionate about relationships, obviously, as a husband, as a father, as a friend. My parents are gone, but as a son, as a brother, all of those things are very important to me. And it's important that I'm responsible to those things. And to me, there is nothing that's more important than that, making the difference in those people's lives in whatever relationship I have with them.
That's great. Yeah, making a difference personally. And that's great to hear. I mean, I think a lot of us get so wrapped up in the day-to-day stuff, but it's take a step back and make that a little bit bigger view of things. And yeah, it's about making a difference in people's lives. That's great. Thanks for that, Warren. As we wrap up, how should people connect with you? So if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
I'm a big proponent of LinkedIn. I connect with lots of folks on LinkedIn. I will say that I do like to have the connection first and just arbitrarily accepting a strange LinkedIn connection because I don't think that that's very ethical. It just doesn't make sense to me because I know that in my past, I've reached out to people and say, hey, Aaron, I see that you're connected to so-and-so. I would like an introduction for various reasons and have you tell me, well, I really don't know them. So I think LinkedIn is a powerful, powerful tool that brings people together, but you have to use it responsibly. But I'm happy to connect with people over that, like reach out to me, have a virtual coffee chat, meet for coffee, whatever it might be. Through LinkedIn, we can do that. I'm obviously reachable. I have my contact information up there, warren.lenard@gmail.com. I can also be reached at warren@lenardgroup.com because I do have that as a coaching and mentoring practice that I believe is different than a lot because it's full scale. It incorporates the passions that you and I talked about before around health, nutrition, and fitness, and not just about coming in and coaching and mentoring somebody on the challenges they're having in the workplace and conflict management or whatever it might be. It's also being able to full scale coach people and mentor people on what they're doing on the outside of work that will enable them to show up better at work. And so I'm happy to chat with people about that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, being intentional and focused about not just the work side, but the whole person, right? That's great. Well, on that note, any other references or book recommendations, podcasts, anything else you want to share with the audience we can put in the show notes?
As far as authors, I do a lot of reading. I'm a huge Malcolm Gladwell fan. I've read every book he's ever written and just love his stuff. I just think it's riveting. Patrick Lencioni, a big fan of his. I'm in the middle of a book now that was one of the keynote speakers at the recent Gartner Symposium, Dan Heath. He wrote a book called Reset, which I think is just tremendous. And I say that because I'm only, halfway through the book, but seeing his keynote, which kind of outlines everything that's kind of in the book, it was probably my favorite session at the Gartner Symposium. So I definitely recommend, and I know he's got other books that I'm sure are probably equally as good.
Warren, I want to say thanks. This was a great conversation and like a lot of insights in there. And so looking forward to sharing this episode with the audience out there. So again, just want to say thank you so much. And thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you doing so. I appreciate our friendship and look forward to some more good times together.
Yeah. Thanks, Warren. Thanks for tuning in to Unlocking Momentum. If today's conversation sparked ideas or gave you a new way to think about leadership, check out our past episodes and resources. Don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you'd like to connect with me, Aaron Kopel, the Momentum Locksmith, you'll find the link in the show notes.